They say men get naughty at 40. I think it's true. When I turned 40, I also actually turned naughty. I went on a date, and I didn't tell my wife about this. It was a very interesting date that I have never been before. It was very intriguing, very intense, and out of the world. And I was so excited with this date that I couldn't contain my excitement. So I came back and actually shared the whole journey of my date with my wife, only to know that she was also equally excited about my dating journey. And she said she also would like to be part of this date. I'm talking about my date with the dark. I'm talking about my date in the dark. I'm talking about my date with the dialogue in the dark. Back in 2009, I was actually traveling the US from India on work. And I was coming back from the city of Atlanta. And I reached the airport only to know that my flight was delayed by more than 10 hours. And I didn't know what to do. So I was wanting to kill time. So I actually approached one of the airport staff and asked them, what is that I can do to kill time? And they said there is something very interesting called Dialogue in the Dark that was happening in the city of Atlanta. And they also said that in the city, Dialogue in the Dark was happening only in the city of Atlanta and the whole of US. So I thought it's probably a good idea to actually go and experience what is Dialogue in the Dark. So I went across the street, reached Dialogue in the Dark, bought my tickets, and I was actually left with a group of about 7-8 people, different people from different nations, different gender, different age groups. So as we were trying to do our social niceties, suddenly we were all pushed into the dark. We were actually kind of moved into the complete darkness. And I have never experienced this kind of darkness in my life. It was so engulfing darkness that I couldn't even see my own fingers. And as I was grappling in the dark, I was stumbling in the dark, I was looking for hope. Suddenly a voice came from the dark. He said his name is so-and-so, and he's going to be the touring guide for the next about 1 hour, and he'll take care of us in complete darkness. And that was a real hope. So our journey in complete darkness started. Basically, Dialogue in the Dark is a very, very interesting, unique, adventurous, thematic exhibition in complete darkness. So as they say, Dialogue in the Dark is the only exhibition in the world where you don't get to see anything. You experience things with your other 4 senses. Like what it is to walk in a park in the dark, what it is to probably go and smell fragrant flowers using your sense of smell, what it is to go and touch a gushing waterfall or a water body and feel the intense coldness of water, all in complete darkness. Or for the matter, what is it to go and cross a creepy, shaky bridge that will challenge your mobility skills in complete darkness? Or for that matter, what it is to go, and depending on the city in which you actually go and experience Dialogue in the Dark, what it is to go and play, let's say, cricket in complete darkness, or a game of rugby, or a game of football, all in complete darkness. So as we say back in India, Dialogue in the Dark's cricket stadium is the only cricket match in the world where match fixing is just not possible, because fixing the bat and the ball itself is such a huge challenge. So people play a lot of games in complete darkness. There is also a dark maze where you actually go and find non-visual clues and try to escape from the dark, or you get into a supermarket and get a hang of shopping using your 2 most important senses of smell and touch and feel and do a lot of things in complete darkness. And finally, the whole journey of Dialogue in the Dark culminates in a cafe or in the Taste of Darkness restaurant where you actually exchange money in real time. You go and grab a meal or you go and buy a drink in complete darkness and dig into your meal or drink using your 2 most important senses of smell and taste. And in and through the whole journey, I was personally intrigued because there was this guy who was actually taking care of me for the last 1 hour, and he was able to move so well in the dark. I was struggling, I was stumbling, but this guy was able to know who was where in that room, and he was moving so beautifully that I was kind of assuming that this guy was actually wearing a night vision goggle or something, some technology. So I actually approached this guide of mine and asked him, how is that he's able to see so many things that I couldn't see in the dark? He said, we will talk about it when we come out. And in the format of Dialogue in the Dark, you are actually led out to the light by this guide. So when we all came out, that was when I actually went through a moment of awe. I was wonderstruck, I was frozen in time, because the guy who was actually guiding us for the last 1 hour, when I saw him, he was a visually impaired person. And that was kind of really made me pause to reflect. What is that this guy is able to do so well? And that's the first time in the world, or the first time in my life at least, where I actually experienced the abilities of the so-called disabled person rather than experiencing their disability. So I've been to a couple of blind schools, deaf schools during marriage anniversary dates or during a birthday, where I have gone and interacted with a person with blindness or a person with hearing and speech impairment. So there was a lot of sympathy quotient there. Dialogue in the Dark was the first place in the world where I had really believed that the so-called disabled are not disabled, they are differently abled. And what they need is not sympathy, but empowering opportunities. I was quite excited, so the whole format was over. I came out, pulled up my phone, called up my wife back in India and told her that I went through something very, very spectacular. This is an out-of-the-world experience. And after I narrated the whole journey to her, she said she was also equally excited. So I said, perhaps I want to come back to India, hang up my corporate boots, and start something called Dialogue in the Dark in India. As they say, this popular Sanskrit word, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, which means, may you be led from darkness to light. In my life, actually, darkness led me to light. So I came back to India and started to research about the disability sector, the PwD sector, popularly known as persons with disability. And me and my new co-founder, my wife, started to research, and that's when we actually stumbled upon this statistics which says that India is the world's largest home for people with disability. The official government of India's statistics talks about 26.8 million people living with disability in India. The UN and the World Bank talks about this number to be 80 million. And out of this 26.8 million people living with disabilities, there are 10 million PwDs, persons with disability, who have reached the right age, who have the right qualifications to get into a job, to be gainfully employed. Sadly, only 1% out of them are employed in this country. So again, me and my new co-founder, my wife, paused and asked, why is that in a country like India, where we are creating more than 1 million jobs, why is that we're not able to create even a few thousand jobs for persons with disability? And that's when, on deeper research, and also after talking to a lot of experts in the NGO sector, we found that one of the critical stumbling blocks for mainstreaming persons with disability in India was lack of awareness, lack of sensitization about the so-called disabled people and their abilities. So we perhaps thought that's a good idea to have Dialogue in the Dark positioned. We thought Dialogue in the Dark is a great idea to position as a mainstreaming platform. So thus we began the whole journey of Dialogue in the Dark. And then the next challenge, or the caveats of the unseen, started to emerge. The first thing that we needed was, after we put in our savings, our life savings, we actually also had to look at capital. So I went and personally met almost about 45 different kinds of investors over about 6 months' time to only counter questions like, is Dialogue in the Dark a for-profit, not-for-profit? Is it only for the blind, or is it for all kinds of disabled people? Is it a social enterprise or a social venture? So my standard reply to all of them used to be, Dialogue in the Dark is not a social venture. Dialogue in the Dark is actually a social adventure. And we need an adventurous set of people to actually find capital to invest in Dialogue in the Dark. So that's when we actually, finally in 2011, January, Dialogue in the Dark opened its first experience center in the city of Hyderabad. And as I talk, we are entering the 10th year of operations in India. And we have welcomed more than 500,000 visitors to Dialogue in the Dark in India. And Dialogue in the Dark has been presented in about 4 permanent exhibition formats across the country. And we have been able to meet more than 2,000 business and corporate owners and business leaders who have come back and taken a message on diversity and social inclusion of persons with disability. Not necessarily blind people, but also all kinds of persons with disability. And that was an aha moment for me personally. And there was another very significant thing that happened in 2014 when the National Skills Development Corporation, one of the premier skilling organizations in this country, came to Dialogue in the Dark and said, why not we look at Dialogue in the Dark as a platform to engage with corporates so that corporates could probably look at hiring persons with disability in their organization. Thus began the new project called Take One, which was started in partnership with the National Skill Development Corporation. And just in a few years, Dialogue in the Dark and NSDC together was able to create 10,000 job pledges from corporate visitors who came to Dialogue in the Dark and post their experience said that we are open to the idea of hiring persons with disability. So I went through aha moment in 2016. I thought my job is done. I've done a great deal of work. I was very satisfied because we know from the statistics that India has got 10 million disabled youth. We have created 10,000 job pledges. So to convert these job pledges into jobs, I thought can be done like this. And that's when the caveats of the unseen started to emerge for us. One of the fundamental assumptions that did not work for me well was we had created these 10,000 job pledges in the private sector. When we went and started to engage with the PwD community, we asked them, are you interested in jobs? And they said yes. But what they thought as jobs were government jobs. Most of the PwDs wanted a bank job or a railway job or a public sector job or a government, state government, central government job, because for them, a government job means job security. So that was one of the first and most significant caveats of the unseen that we encountered in the dark. The second major caveat that we faced also was the 10,000 job pledges that Dialogue in the Dark created. Where did we create? We created in urban India. And where do PwDs live? 70% of PwDs in India live in the rural villages of India. So that was the next major caveat, and only 52% of them were literate. So this took us to the next caveat, which was, how do we attract these rural PwDs to urban jobs? So we went and started to meet the families of the PwDs themselves, the parents and stuff like that. And then we found that most of the parents were very, very reluctant to send their PwDs to their children to the cities. When we met them, they would ask us very simple questions, but very powerful. In fact, we met a parent, a father, who said, my child lives with me in the village. He's very secure, very safe setting. Where will they live when they come to the city of Hyderabad or Bangalore? Who will take care of them? How will they commute to work? Are people in the city ready to welcome persons with disability? So these were the very, very important questions, very well-placed questions that we were actually starting to find answers. That is when I also was reminded of a very interesting anecdote that really happened in our Dialogue in the Dark. We had this visually impaired guide who was working with us. And as part of her routine, she was also writing a lot of government jobs. And it happened that one day she actually wanted to go and write this government job. So she's rushing out of her home. She reached the bus stand. She had her hall ticket on her hand. She went and she's got a low vision. She had light perception. So she went to the bus stand. She found somebody there like a shadow. So she handed out her hall ticket. And she said, hey, can you tell me which bus will take me to this examination center? No answer, no reply. But the hall ticket was taken away from her hand. She was waiting. She was still looking around. No reply. She said, hello, can you tell me which bus will take me to this place? Again, no reply. By the time her friend, who was actually maybe a few meters away, came running to her and said, hey, what are you doing? You're talking to a cow. She said, what? I'm talking to a cow? Then she said, what happened to my hall ticket? She said, the cow has already chewed it. And this girl was on the local newspaper headlines the next day, and it said that this visually impaired person is actually seeking guidance from a cow as to how to reach her examination center. When she came back to our center and she narrated the story, including her, all of us had a hearty laugh. But I think the point the parents made is very valid. Are our cities ready to actually welcome persons with disability? So we went deeper and deeper. We started to research further, and then we stumbled upon the next major caveat of the unseen, which was the PwDs who are in rural India had the right age, had the right qualification. But what we found was they did not have the employability skills, nor the technical skills. So when we started to talk to the NGO community, we found that there were few good, credible organizations who were doing training, but they were far and few. If we need to convert these 10,000 job pledges into jobs, we need to look at an ecosystem of training. So we thought probably, why not we ourselves start looking at the entire ecosystem of skilling of persons with disability. And that's when the largest or the biggest caveats of the unseen started to emerge for me. What we discovered is, when you have to train a person with disability, for example, if you're looking at a person with hearing and speech impairment, you need to have something called a sign language interpreter. So there is a technical skills trainer, or there is a employability skills trainer, and then there is a sign language interpreter. And we also found that wherever we did not need a sign language interpreter for other kinds of disabilities, we also found that in a classroom, we need to have a trainer who is good in handling a person with disability, and we needed a trainer who is good in technical skills. So what it meant was we need to push up the cost of skilling. The more resources were required in terms of human resource and financial resources. So end of the day, after a lot of struggle and learning and relearning and unlearning, we successfully were able to skill train 6,000 PwDs across various disabilities in a few years, across our 10 different centers in the country. And we were able to place 4,000 people in corporate entry-level jobs, leading to a new income creation of almost 50 crores in the hands of these PwDs. That was, again, one of the biggest, that was again one of the biggest points where I paused. I was extremely excited. And I was also kind of pondering with this potential, with this possibility. I thought, if 5,000 people can earn actually 50 crores in a year, what happens if this 500 can become 5,000? What happens if this 5,000 can actually become 50,000? What can happen if this 500,000 can become 1 million? So if we are able to create 1 million jobs for persons with disability in this country, we would have contributed almost about $2 billion of annual income in the hands of these PwDs. And that's exactly what the World Bank report states, where they say if a substantial number of persons with disability are mainstreamed and gainfully employed, they could contribute almost about 2% of India's GDP. So most of the times what happens is, we only see what we see, which is most of the times we see them as disabled, persons with disability. They are unemployable, and they are passive social welfare recipients because they get a lot of schemes and pensions and stuff like that. What we do not see, the unseen, is actually they are capable. They are persons with ability. They're not persons with disability. And they are a potential new form of a workforce in India. And they are active economic contributors. So what can we do to make the unseen become seen are the caveats. So we need to address 3 or 4 major challenges in this country. At a very broad macro level, I think we need to look at public policy, advocacy, change management, ensuring that we have an enabling environment. For example, the fundamental challenge is how do we make our public infrastructure accessible? How do we make our transport accessible? How can we ensure that a person with disability is able to move from his home to workplace without anybody's support independently? So that's one of the key things that we need to address. And once that is addressed, we have to look at the physical accessibility at every organization. Today we have a lot of ramps, we have accessible toilets, but they're all aimed at persons with mobility disability. Can we ensure that a person with visual impairment can actually walk into a building and come out of the building using tactical designs? So is our design inclusive? Can we ensure that a person with hearing and speech impairment actually is able to go into a building and come out using visual clues? So these are the things we need to address as a country and also as society at large. Today we're talking about artificial intelligence, mobile technologies, digital e-commerce and stuff like that. So tomorrow, can a person with visual impairment be able to access any of these things? Not really, it's still a work in progress. So can we expect that the digital technology is also accessible for all kinds of persons with disability? But for all these things to actually happen, in our experience, the most important thing is mindset accessibility. If we can actually sensitize and make every human being aware in this whole planet about the abilities of the person with disability, I think we'll become an inclusive planet. And if we can really do this in a country of 1.3 billion people, where we're able to really ensure that each and every person is ready to welcome a person with disability in their social, personal, professional spaces, I think India will truly become a Desi India. And Desi stands for Divyang Jan Empowerment for Social Inclusion. Thank you.